to everyone that's joined us, and hello particularly to Lauren, which this, I say it every week when we have a webinar. This is going to be really interesting. They are all really interesting. I'm just fascinated by the people that we get talking who are real experts in the subjects, and hopefully we all, I learn something every week. It's really interesting. So anyway, Lauren today is going to talk to us about ME and CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. And I think, over the years, I think it'd be right to say that in many quarters, it's quite a controversial subject. And we have run clinics in connection with the NHS before, and it has provoked quite a lot of different and conflicting thoughts and opinions. And I know we're going to cover this, Lauren, but it would be interesting now with COVID and how everyone's perception of, chronic fatigue has now changed with long COVID. I think hopefully more of the spotlight will now really shine on this condition. Yeah. And, obviously one of the biggest problems is, and obviously the people who are joining us, if you have it, you'll know all too well, you certainly don't have it written on your forehead. You look fantastic, you look fine, but that's not actually how you feel inside with your energy levels. So, Lauren, please let me introduce you, or no, better still, let me get you to introduce yourself. And what is really interesting with Lauren is that she actually has her own personal story to tell as to why she's actually here today talking about this subject. So Lauren, if you'd like to just explain a bit about your background, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Lauren Windas, and I'm a registered nutritional therapist and naturopath. I'm also trained in NLP as well, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And my background, essentially, it all started when I was at university back in 2012, when I was doing my English literature degree. And I became unwell with a viral infection in my second year. And it was one of those really kind of severe viruses where it lasted kind of 2 to 3 weeks. It was just going on, and it was a really severe one. And I remember just not feeling right. And I went to the doctors and they said, look, it's a virus. They put me on antibiotics, which was quite funny for a viral infection. But anyway, I took them. And then I was advised to go home and rest. And whilst I recovered from the acute viral symptoms, I went back to university after this 3-week period, and I just never felt the same. I still felt under the weather, and I had all kinds of different symptoms, fatigue obviously being one of them, but brain fog, digestive issues, which I'd had previously, which got a lot worse, feeling dizzy, feeling hungover when I'd not touched a drop of alcohol. So as you can imagine, just, going to the doctors again and again, just to try and get some answers, and having all of the standard tests done and everything coming back normal. Anyway, long story short, I've spent the last, I'm going to say like 7 to 8 years really trying to kind of put the puzzle pieces back together in terms of my health, and getting to a stage now where I'm recovered and I'm able to manage a business and all of the other things that I've achieved during that struggle. But during that time, it just made me realize how, because I really did have to go down the alternative route and just seeing, nutritional therapists and working through the functional medicine approach, which I'll talk to you about as we go through the slides. But it made me realize that there's just not a lot of support out there for those that are going through post-viral illnesses or ME, chronic fatigue. And I didn't even know what was wrong with me until maybe it was around, I'd probably say a year or two down the line of speaking to different doctors and everything coming back normal, and then a specialist just saying to me, oh, ME, CFS, but it never actually, I don't think it actually formally got written on my medical files. And from what I'd Googled of it, I was terrified from what I read, because it said no cure, and, some people didn't think that it existed. So there was a whole load of controversy around this condition. So I never really accepted it until later down the line as a formal diagnosis. I was just trying to find the answers as to what was going on with me and how to get myself functioning again. But yeah, it's an area I'm hugely interested in, and I think especially since the pandemic, and obviously those who are suffering with long COVID, it's definitely shined a spotlight on this subject area, which I think is a good thing. It's just a shame that it's taken more patients suffering to get to that stage.
And I think obviously more and more is going to come out, and obviously when we spoke previously, really what's quite interesting about long COVID, the effects of seems to be the people that have long COVID are the people, as you said, that actually didn't go to the doctor. They didn't really have a major problem. They may not have really noticed that they, had COVID as such, and now they're beginning to see the problem. So yeah, so please do post your questions as normal as we go along, and we'll get to answer them hopefully all at the end. We do have, it's another slide pack this week, but do you know what? Having looked at the slide pack, there's some lovely slides, and it's just very, very nice and a peaceful slideshow in many ways, I think.
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully not too fatiguing.
Yeah, not too fatiguing. So if we'd like to kick off, and if I may, I'll ask questions as we go along, Lauren, if I'm not sure that I kind of necessarily understand things, because sometimes I'm a bit slow.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. So yeah, let me kick off and start. Can everyone see my screen first of all?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, well, I thought I'd just start with some stats really, just to contextualize this issue. And that first of all, a UK survey reported that 1 in every 5 people feel unusually tired, and 1 in 10 have prolonged fatigue. I mean, how many people kind of walk about their daily lives saying that they're tired all the time? It's one of those things that I think we hear a lot these days. And actually 1/5 of GP visits is down to tiredness and fatigue. And 250,000 people in the UK suffer with a condition called MECFS, which we're going to go on to talk in a bit more detail about, with many more at the moment obviously being diagnosed due to post-viral COVID. So a bit about energy. I thought I'd just contextualize by talking about energy and why energy is important to do all of the things that we do, physically, but also mentally. But first of all, energy fuels your body's internal functions. So we need energy in order for our bodies to move, in order for us to regulate our body temperature, to keep our heart pumping, and also to keep up with all of the different metabolic processes within our body. And we also need energy to repair, build, and maintain cells and bodily tissues. So if I had a cut on my finger, I would need physical energy within my body to actually move white blood cells to actually repair that site of injury, to actually heal and repair that. And we also need energy for supporting our external activities that help us to kind of interact with the physical world around us. So energy actually feeds into one of our body's stress responses called the fight or flight system. And so we need energy in order to get away from a threat or danger. And then also, energy is something that we need to think optimally. So actually, very interestingly, 20% of our total energy haul goes on brain function. So thinking is also quite an energy demanding process. So that just kind of contextualizes what is energy and why we need it, just to go about all of the daily activities that keep us alive and keep our bodies functioning sufficiently.
And funny enough, I saw something about how burning calories, and I know I can't remember what program it was I was watching, but just sitting on a couch doing nothing burns calories. Likewise, sleeping burns calories. And I don't think people realize that energy gets consumed just by us living and breathing. It isn't that running around and doing lots of things frantically. It is just our being, which probably makes us to understand why we feel we've done nothing, but we can still be very tired.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's our basal metabolic rate. So if we're sitting and literally, if you're just lying flat on the floor all day, not moving a muscle or picking up anything, you are still, as you say, sleeping. You could be doing anything like sitting, doing nothing, and your body is burning energy in order to keep the body's physiological processes going, and to keep your heart rate up and your body temperature regulated and your brain functioning optimally. So it's just keeping you alive. So yes, we do burn energy at rest. Yeah. So this next slide was just to kind of highlight, as we were saying before, that, it is a hidden epidemic. I think, we all talk about tiredness, but it's not something that's highlighted in the mainstream media enough. And I think definitely the pandemic's brought that increased awareness due to the group of those suffering with fatigue related or post-viral related illness. And if we talk about long COVID essentially refers to a term of those who have had long-lasting health problems due to a COVID infection, and now this is being heavily linked with ME, chronic fatigue. And the thing about long COVID is that we can kind of cluster it into two groups. You've got those who were hospitalized with a COVID infection, and that those who potentially were in the ICU, who are still struggling, you know, they're clear of COVID now in terms of the acute infection, but they still have that long-term organ damage. Now, that's a separate thing to the kind of long COVID. That's almost kind of related to post-intensive care syndrome. And then you have long COVID, and long COVID is those, as we were saying, Katriona, that have had an infection that they've not necessarily reported to their GP. They probably haven't been hospitalized with COVID. They've just been at home battling the infection. And as they've come out of the acute stage of that illness, they're still not feeling quite well. So it's kind of that never been well since scenario. And as I said, this is being linked to a condition called ME chronic fatigue syndrome. So what is ME/CFS? Well, it refers to an illness that affects multiple bodily systems, including our nervous system, our endocrine system. Endocrine system is like a fancy term for our body's hormonal systems, our immune system, and also our digestive system. And ME/CFS can affect every single individual in a totally different way. So one person might have fatigue with digestive issues, another person might have fatigue with brain fog. So you could have various different symptoms as part of that picture, but it can vary between individuals. And it's estimated that there are 250,000 people in the UK with ME/CFS. However, the diagnosis is a little bit of a grey area, so it's thought that there are many more people who are undiagnosed with this, which was the case with me. It was something that a specialist mentioned to me, but it was never formally written on my medical files, which shows why it's such a contentious issue and why it struggles to get diagnosed. The World Health Organization defines ME as neurological. However, there are the jury's very much still out on what type of condition this is. Some people suggest that it is autoimmune in origin. Some people say neurological. I'm very much on the fence. I would say that it's a multi-system illness as it affects various different systems. And we just don't know enough about it at this moment in order to kind of say exactly what type of condition it is, because it affects so many different bodily systems. And then we've got common different names that are associated with ME. So, you'll hear ME, which essentially refers to myalgic encephalomyelitis. Now, that is an absolute mouthful. And actually, if you were to break the term down, is in myo, meaning muscle, and algic meaning muscle, so it means muscle pain, that word. Encephalo, so enceph meaning brain, and myelitis referring to inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. So ME simply means inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. So this name came as a result of an outbreak at the Royal Free Hospital in London in the 1950s. And the reason this came about because the illness that was spotted back then, which was ME/CFS, they called it myalgic encephalomyelitis because it much resembled polio. And that's where that kind of ME term came from. But so many years later, we had some other medical professionals who called it chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is where it kind of got clustered as ME/CFS. So for the talk, I'm going to refer to ME/CFS as kind of one term, although there is a lot of kind of controversy in terms of these labels that are given. As you can see, there are different terms here. So chronic fatigue syndrome, that one got a lot of especially patients complaining about that term because of the fact that it trivializes the condition. And it's almost like describing somebody with dementia as having chronic forgetfulness syndrome, because this illness is not just about being tired all of the time. It really significantly impacts people's lives. And it doesn't need to be the case that you're just tired. Some people are housebound and bedbound with this condition, and there are all sorts of other symptoms associated with it other than just fatigue. So you've got ME, you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, adrenal fatigue, which isn't necessarily accepted as a medical diagnosis. It's more suggesting that the adrenals potentially can be strained, which I'm going to go on to talk about. And then you've got chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome, which isn't too much of a bad term. It kind of suggests a little bit of what's happening in the condition. But again, some people suggest that it's slightly trivializing it, again, with the chronic fatigue element. Then you've got systemic exertion intolerance disease, which links to one of the key symptoms of ME, which is post-exertional malaise, which I'll talk to you about on the next slide. Then you've got burnout, and burnout, that one gets quite a lot of talk in the kind of wellness world. The thing about burnout, though, is that it is not classed as a medical condition as such. It's more associated as an occupational phenomena, where people who are stressed out with their jobs are experiencing symptoms of fatigue and things like low mood and low motivation. So that's sometimes is clustered within this kind of picture, but as I said, it's not a medical condition as such. And then you've got post-viral fatigue, and that does link a lot to kind of the ME/CFS scenario, because a lot of people that get this condition have reported a viral infection when the illness appears. So symptoms of this condition, as you can see, it's a complete minefield. There are various different symptoms that are associated with this illness. I've highlighted here in bold this symptom of post-exertional malaise, and I also call this payback. It's a symptom where you've gone past your energy threshold, and as a result of that, you're experiencing a crash in your energy or your other symptoms that you're experiencing. So for some people, it could be something as simple as walking to the other side of your house, or just to go to the bathroom to shower, or pick up your toothbrush to brush your teeth. Or for others, it might be just walking to the shops. So everybody has a unique energy envelope and threshold. And what can happen is, if you exert yourself, you end up with post-exertional malaise. And this is highlighted in bold because it's one of the key defining symptoms of ME/CFS. So this is generally what medical professionals will look for to actually diagnose the condition, because the condition is a diagnosis of exclusion. There's no standard blood work that actually sees if you have ME/CFS. It's based on ruling out anything that crosses over and overlaps with fatigue. So whether you have a sleep disorder, for example, needs to be ruled out, whether you have depression, because sometimes depression can be linked with fatigue. So what they do is they isolate all of those various different things that could be a cause of those symptoms, and then you're left with this picture, and they look for post-exertional malaise as part of that criteria. So all the other symptoms, as you can see, flu-like symptoms, heart palpitations. Some people get sensitivities to chemicals, smells, sounds and lights, dizziness and loss of balance, cognitive impairments, gastrointestinal symptoms like food intolerances and IBS, muscle pains, persistent fatigue, of course, and stress-related issues as well. So kind of difficulties tolerating stress or anxiety.
I was just going to kind of butt in.
Of course.
I think that's what's so frustrating. I know from previous things, it's this business that there isn't a blood test that one can take to get your definition, and that's the most frustrating thing. And of course, it manifests itself in so many ways, and everybody has a different experience with it. So, I mean, it must be incredibly frustrating to not be able to. So that's what you've definitely got. And I suppose the time period it takes for this diagnosis to rule out other things, you know, an IBS or bloating or something is, all the sort of gastro issues that one can get as well could be, as you said, something totally different. But it takes a while to go through those.
It does. And yeah, I mean, it's the time it takes to rule out all of the other potential diagnoses that could be causing your symptoms, and the actual NICE clinical guidelines. So what the NHS kind of go by in terms of diagnosing this is 3 months. So these symptoms, in order to classify a diagnosis, and obviously once you've ruled everything else out, those symptoms need to have been present for 3 months, which is hugely worrying for the patient, because they need to be told, you know, the correct advice, and they need to know how to manage and sort themselves out. But when you're just waiting and waiting, that adds a lot of stress to the system, which can also exacerbate these symptoms as well. So it is unsettling, and I think a lot more needs to be done about that. But yeah, so it's a spectrum disorder. So as I said, each person with this is unique. You have 25% of patients who are housebound and bedbound with that, which is hugely distressing. And some of those need full-time carers because they're sensitive to noise. They have to be in a dark room all day. You know, so it is very, very life impacting. So you can see where this discrepancy around the word chronic fatigue syndrome comes from, because for something that is that debilitating, it really does negate and trivialize the illness. So I can see why a lot of patients are, you know, hugely debating that term CFS. And then you've got those who, the other 75% who, as we were saying, Catriona, you know, they're mobile, but they're still struggling with functional daily symptoms, and they might look well, but they're not well. They're still struggling to cope and get by, and they might need to sleep on, you know, weekends just so that they can catch up and feel optimum again. So yeah, so as I said, everyone's unique. You've got 25% on one hand who are bedbound, and then 75% who are struggling with these functional daily issues.
And I think it must be really hard also, because especially if you've been a well person up until the point you, I suppose it's almost like get hit with this issue, is if you've been well, you're used to maybe having a cold and feeling rubbish for a week or 2 weeks, and then you expect to get better and go on to your normal life. And then, well, wait a minute, 2 weeks have gone by, 3 weeks have gone by, 4 weeks, and I'm still feeling rubbish.
Yeah.
That must be it. And I think with any illness and any chronic condition, the sooner that one can somehow find some form of diagnosis, it allows you to start getting your head around it and being able to manage it. But probably until you've had that diagnosis, it's very hard to know where to start the management of it.
Absolutely. I think as well, like it's so, one of my biggest things when I was unwell is I just didn't know what was wrong with me. I was trying to find answers in so many different things, and I just never knew. And I think when you don't know what's happening in your body, it can be really unsettling and really unnerving. And I think that adds a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, which again compounds the situation. So it is really important for, you know, medical and professionals to learn more about it, for sure. So yeah, what causes it? To kind of answer this in short, we don't actually know what causes ME/CFS. We have research which is giving us a lot of clues into the picture of ME/CFS, and there are various different theories and hypotheses around it. But I like to kind of categorize this into 3 P's, if you like. So predisposition, precipitating triggers, and perpetuating factors. So you have the genetic capacity potentially to develop ME/CFS, and there is studies now going into a predisposition towards ME/CFS. So there's a study called the Decode ME study, which is actually happening in the UK, where they're looking into genetic variants of whether you are predisposed to developing ME/CFS or not. But there are some early studies that suggest genetic links towards the illness. Then you have this precipitating trigger, and a study in the Lancet showed that I think it was about 75% of patients with ME/CFS reported a viral or bacterial infection upon their symptoms starting. For some people it can be parasitic, but generally it's the case that it's viral or bacterial, mostly viral, I would say. But yeah, so you've got that trigger event. So you know, it's that virus and that never being well since. However, there are some people, I've had some clients come to see me who they have had a surgery. I had a gentleman who had a metal plate put in his hand for a minor wrist injury, and ever since then he had the classical symptoms of ME/CFS. And some people, it could be due to like a trauma, like a car crash, or significant life event, the precipitating trigger that kind of switches the situation on. And then you've got perpetuating factors. So this is kind of what is happening in the body as a result of this, what's driving that illness process, and what's almost kind of keeping you in the way of recovery, if you like. So things like heavy stress, traumas, deficiencies or toxicities, which I'm going to go on to discuss in a little bit on the next couple of slides. And ultimately, these are the 3 situations that cause the right conditions to make ME/CFS possible, where the body, essentially, it's becoming hyper responsive to its environment. And that's why it's chucking a boatload of symptoms at you, because everything that it's doing, it's struggling to meet its daily demands. So everything, you know, whether it's lack of sleep, or you haven't slept well, or you've had a stressful day, or you've eaten a heavy meal, all of these different lifestyle factors factors can actually impact the picture of symptoms that are happening and being experienced. This is why it's very much a condition that needs to be managed via diet and lifestyle, and looking at the interplay between that and your symptoms. So the diagnosis dilemma. So as we were saying, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So when your doctor can't find anything else wrong with you, this is the only explanation that's left. And that is because there are no standard NHS medical tests for ME/CFS. Although there is some interesting research coming out of Stanford University in the US, where they're looking at the immune system, and they're looking at a test to see how the immune system cells respond to stress. So potentially, hopefully, maybe sometime down the line, we might have a test that can help to determine ME/CFS through blood work, which would be amazing. And yeah, because cases vary and there are no consistent set of symptoms among patients. So as I said, symptoms like fatigue can cross over with various other different conditions, such as depression or sleep disorders. And also there is a theory that ME/CFS might be a whole multitude of different conditions sitting under one umbrella. So this is also why it's very difficult for doctors to kind of pigeonhole and pinpoint. And yeah, there's no international agreement on classifying these symptoms or even what to call the condition. So again, there's a lot of confusion around this area. So I just wanted to quickly highlight the metabolic and functional imbalances that are happening in ME/CFS. So you've got alterations in the gut microbiome. So within our gut, we have various different communities of microbes, so different types of bacteria colonies. And what can happen is in ME/CFS, there is some studies to suggest that there are imbalances within these bacterial communities, which is referred to as dysbiosis. So what I will often do in clinic is often run stool tests on ME/CFS patients to actually determine what their markers are within their gut, because the gut can actually give a lot of clues as to the overall health of the body, especially looking at dysbiosis, but also looking at the immune system as well, because we know that 70% of the immune system actually does reside within the gut. Then also some studies have found autoimmune mechanisms, so an overactive immune system. So they found increased levels of these types of cells called natural killer cells in ME/CFS patients. They've also found autonomic nervous system dysfunction. So the nervous system is what helps our body to respond to stress. So we have our fight or flight response, and we also have our calming, rest or digest response. And what can happen in ME/CFS is that typically we go into this sympathetic nervous system predominance, where we're kind of almost chronically in this fight or flight state. It's called dysautonomia, and the body's basically activated in this state, and also that can be a reason why we have a lot of different symptoms, such as the fatigue, such as the gut issues, because your nervous system is shutting down as a result of trying to respond to a danger, but there's no immediate danger there, and as a result your body's functional systems are just misaligned and throwing out all of these symptoms as a result of that. Some patients have low blood pressure, so there can be this hypotension happening. Something called HPA axis dysfunction, which is basically just a term that talks about our stress response systems. So the hormones that come from our adrenal glands, so this is the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal axis, but namely the adrenal glands can often be stressed. They can either be underfunctioning, so not secreting enough cortisol, which is one of our body's major stress hormones. Sometimes they can be causing too much stress hormone. So again, I always try to look at that within certain functional tests, such as a salivary adrenal stress profile. And that can really help to tell where you are on that spectrum. And then also some investigations have looked into cellular metabolism. So within our cells, we have these tiny little energy factories, if you like, called mitochondria. And the mitochondria produce chemicals called ATP. And ATP is basically our energy currency. So it's what we use to, again, use all those energy processes that we go throughout the day. And it's critically important that we have healthy mitochondria. And what is happening in ME/CFS is that energy demand exceeds energy delivery. So by that, your mitochondria aren't able to produce ATP quickly enough in order to meet the body's demands. And often that's the reason why people get this post-exertional malaise, is because they're going past their threshold, to which previously wouldn't have been a threshold, but because their mitochondria are kind of impaired, it can cause these crashes in energy as to why maybe they're in bed for a couple of days after exerting themselves, because those mitochondria aren't producing energy quick enough to meet their daily demands, essentially. So that's one reason why we get that post-exertional malaise. So these are just a couple of the functional impairments that have been shown in various studies to be implicated with ME/CFS.
And I think that's why it's so important to try to understand it as soon as possible, so that you can start managing your energy levels. And I'm sure you've heard, spoonies, that expression of 10 spoons or how many spoons you have of energy, and how much, doing one activity is 7 spoons, so I've only got 3 left for the rest of the day, which I think is a great way to explain to people. And I think it's so the importance of getting diagnosed sooner rather than later, if possible, to have a diagnosis. But you then, once you're managing it, you're not likely to go down into some form of depression of like, when on earth am I going to get better? And understanding getting better, yes, you will become better than you were, but it's how you manage it and how quickly you start managing it to move forward, as opposed to just waiting for that day you wake up and everything's rosy and perfect, which, as we know, never actually is, but we have it in our heads that it is.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's like what we were talking about the idea of recovery. And people always say to me, are you 100% recovered? Are you 100% well? And I say, well, actually, what is 100%? Because we have this idea of perfection, don't we, around health, and how many people walk down the street, and I'm sure there's somebody every person's going to have some minor niggle here and there. So it's not always about being overly attuned to your symptoms, because I think with ME/CFS you can definitely get that way. But I think it's through taking an active approach rather than a passive approach to your health, because I think this illness especially demands that you take an active approach, and then trying to pace yourself, which we'll talk about as we move forward through the slides, to a point where you get to, which was like me, where I started to, because I was getting better and better, I was able to look at my life less through the lens of illness, more through the lens of just living my life. And for me, that is recovery, is you're not kind of shaped through the lens of your illness. You're not living your life just to be like, oh, I need to sleep that weekend so that I can, get through this next event and all this, that, and the other. And it's about, pacing yourself, doing all of the right appropriate things to try and optimize your systems and support recovery and healing. And then you'll start moving forwards, and you'll less think about those symptoms, and actually they start to fade into the background as you recover, and that's how you ultimately get well. But yeah, not heavily filtering, I think, is an important one. But yeah, deficiencies and toxicity. So these are the things that, again, can keep the situation ongoing and almost kind of get in the way and impede recovery. So thyroid and adrenal insufficiencies. So thyroid being a little gland that's situated just below the Adam's apple, and that controls our body's metabolism and also our immune function. So it's no surprise that when the thyroid goes out of whack, whether it's underfunctioning or overfunctioning, we can get symptoms of fatigue. Similarly, the adrenal glands, which are teeny little glands that sit on top of our kidneys and secrete cortisol, adrenaline, and DHEA. They're our stress hormones. And again, if those are underfiring or overfiring, we can get fatigue. We also want to look at any nutritional deficiencies, ruling out things like iron deficiency anemia, for instance, B12 or folate deficiency anemia, because they can also add to the puzzle piece that is fatigue. And as we said before, mitochondrial impairments as well. And then you can have toxicity, so things that kind of contribute to that load. Heavy metals, so are you somebody that consumes a lot of heavy metal fish, like mercury-rich fish, like tuna, or you were exposed to dental amalgams? Emotions and trauma. Some people are on the fence in terms of how this kind of fits into the picture of ME/CFS, but I think definitely adopting a view where you can manage your emotions and look into psychology. It's not to say that this is a psychological condition by any means, but I definitely think that this is a huge part of the puzzle piece, because it helps to put the body into that rest or digest stage and almost kind of heal the nervous system when the nervous system's out of whack. Infections, so dysbiosis, as I've mentioned before, sometimes parasites can be there, or mold and chemical sensitivities. So as you can see, these are kind of some of the puzzle pieces that I tend to look at in my clinic, and I'll use functional testing to explore those with clients, because these do give us a bit of a picture into each patient's unique scenario. And I do think personalization is really key when it comes to dealing with chronic fatigue. Yeah, this is just kind of a bit of a summary on the page below, before, and low blood sugar again being another key one. So see, nutrition will come into play, which we're going to go on to chat about. So putting the puzzle pieces together, I think it's definitely about having a holistic view when it comes to ME/CFS, because unfortunately there is no one pill to fix this situation, and it's about diving in deeper into the root causes of those symptoms, what's perpetuating and what's driving that, in order to get the body into a state of balance, so homeostasis, which is where those symptoms are going to stop occurring altogether. And it's about tipping the body back into that. And that's kind of what I was saying about with recovery. It's, you know, you're tipping your body back into balance sooner or later, you're going to be less focused on any minor health niggle that kind of comes up, because they're becoming lesser and lesser. Those crashes get lesser and lesser, they get shorter and they get less frequent, and that is, you know, what recovery is all about. And it's understanding that it's not a linear approach, it's not straightforward. You might feel like you're taking one step forward, two steps back, but you are still always moving forwards, and never forgetting that, I think, is really important. And how to enhance energy through diet and lifestyle. So let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food, is what Hippocrates once said, who was named the father of modern medicine. And I think, as I said before, having an approach that takes an active rather than passive approach to this illness is really critical, because there is no pill that's going to be there to solve everything, but it's about getting the body's functional systems aligned, and using approaches through our diet and through our lifestyle in order to achieve that.
I think actually what you've just said is so true of so many things. There isn't a magic pill. There actually isn't a magic pill for anything, to be honest, because you might have suddenly got rid of the symptom that the pill has got rid of the symptom, yeah, but you might still feel mentally not great inside. So there is no magic pill. It is a completely, and I hate using that word holistic because it's been so overused, but it is, it's having a whole rounded approach to it. And I think having, particularly with this, it's trying to get yourself in the right mental state to start with, to give yourself the strongest position mentally, because that means then your body will start embracing everything you're trying to move it forward to, the goal you're going for.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, you know, there is no one answer. And I think that's what's so difficult about it. And I think that's why personalization and personalized approaches, and functional medicine, which is a personalized approach, is really key, because it's about looking at that person on an individual level and understanding what the root drivers are for them, and what's getting in the way of that recovery for them. And that's why, yes, addressing things like, you know, psychology and mindset is really key. Looking at the diet, looking at the functioning of the gut, looking at the functioning of the mitochondria and the thyroid and the adrenals, you know, all of the different things that come into play that actually make our bodies work optimally, that for some reason it's not happening for you at the moment, and trying to understand why that is. But yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. So when it comes to eating for energy, I just wanted to kind of highlight, first of all, the macronutrients that go into play when it comes to energy. So obviously we've got carbohydrates. Carbs, I think, have been demonized for such a long time, but we need to remember that carbs are actually our body's major energy source, and we can break carbs down into three categories. You've got sugars, you've got starches, and you've got fiber. Now, we don't necessarily want to be eating lots of the sugars, because those are what can spike our blood sugar levels quite high, and we can get peaks and troughs in our energy levels, which is only going to disrupt our, you know, fatigue basically, and add fuel to the fire with that. But we want to be aiming for slow release carbohydrates, and carbohydrates in and of themselves can actually support with serotonin production. So serotonin being one of our body's neurotransmitters, which is a brain chemical that supports our mood. So having slow release carbohydrates like whole grains, things like oats, rice, barley, those types of foods are fantastic. And And with fiber as well, fiber being a carbohydrate, which actually the body doesn't digest, but our gut bacteria digest. So our gut bacteria can make use of all of these different beneficial products from fiber and produce anti-inflammatory compounds within the gut. So it's like a win-win in terms of when we eat carbs, but we need to eat the right types of carbohydrates, which is those ones that are slow releasing and full of fiber. And then protein. So protein is something that is one of the body's building blocks. It forms things like our antibodies in our immune system. It forms our hair, our skin, our nails, our muscles and tissues. And we need roughly around 0.75 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight each day. But that depends obviously on our specific goals, our activity levels as well. But generally, approximately 0.75 to a gram per kilogram of body weight. And protein you'll find in things like eggs, dairy products, animal products, like your meat and fish, but also you can find it in plant-based sources as well, such as your beans, your whole grains, nuts and seeds. And if you're vegetarian or vegan, you just need to ensure that you are consuming whole sources of protein, so complete proteins, should I say, which have all of the amino acids in there. So you can do that by eating things like edamame and tofu and buckwheat and chia seeds as well. So they're all complete proteins which contain all of the essential amino acids that we need for our body to function optimally. So yeah, protein is hugely important. And then we've got fats. And I wanted to kind of highlight attention to omega-3 fats, particularly when it comes to energy. So studies have linked omega-3s, which is a polyunsaturated fat, with increased mood and cognition, and ensuring that we get adequate amounts of things like oily fish in the diet, if you eat fish, or if you're vegan, consuming plant-based sources of omega-3, or a marine-derived algae, which has the active EPA and the DHA, which are the components which have been studied for this cognition. So yeah, I always recommend about 1 to 2 portions of oily fish a week, if you can, or ensuring that you supplement with an algae, as I said, if you're vegetarian or vegan. And so those are kind of your macronutrients. And when it comes to the microelements, we're looking particularly for energy at things like B vitamins, particularly B1, B2, 3, 6, and 12. And they help to convert carbs from our food into energy. B12 obviously is one of those that we need to really watch out for if we're vegan or vegetarian. It's very common to be deficient in those if you're vegan, because you can only exclusively get B12 in animal products. And then magnesium, B vitamins as well, they are depleted with stress. So we need to, again, make sure that we are having sufficient amounts in the diet, and as well, always opting for whole grains, because if we remove the bran from the grains and we're opting for a lot of refined carbohydrates and things like that, then we don't get the B vitamins in there. So that's why we want to go for whole grain varieties where possible. So magnesium involved in over 300 different chemical processes in the body, and also really critical in the Krebs cycle, which is the body's ability to break down our food and produce that ATP, which is what we were talking about within the mitochondria earlier on. So yeah, also is very key in regulating our stress response as well. So we do need magnesium, and also magnesium gets depleted in stress as well. And also our soil is quite deficient in magnesium as well. So ensuring that we have a magnesium supplement potentially if we need one, if we're not getting enough through the diet. And then iron, this is a mineral that helps to manufacture red blood cells, which carry oxygen around our body. Again, if you're vegetarian or vegan and you're not getting enough iron in the diet, that could contribute to an iron deficiency anemia. And it's very common among menstruating women, because you're obviously losing blood through your monthly cycle, and that's something to be aware of as well. And if you're concerned, then you can always get your levels checked out with the GP. They do test for the kind of major ones like iron and B12. If you want to test for various different microelements, then you can do private blood work, which I run with clients in my clinic. But yeah, it tends to be the case that micronutrient deficiencies are more common than the toxicities though. So yeah, key kind of foods for, as we've just explored with those microelements, whole grains for B vitamins. You can also get B vits in eggs, dairy, yogurt, cheese, and you can also get B12 obviously exclusively in the animal products, but you can get it for vegans in nutritional yeast if you are vegan. Magnesium, very rich in kidney beans, bananas, pumpkin seeds, and spinach and dark chocolate. And then when it comes to iron, I forgot to mention this on the previous slide, but we have two different forms of iron. We've got heme iron and non-heme iron. And the heme iron comes from the animal products, so things like organ meats like liver, beef, chicken, and fish. And that is more bioavailable, which means that the iron that we're taking in, our body is absorbing better. But in things like the plant-based sources of non-heme iron, so almonds, spinach, chickpeas, and lentils, it's less absorbable, but we can increase that absorption through vitamin C. So if we had, say, a chili, which has got lentils in it, for example, and we just put a squeeze of lemon or lime juice on there, the vitamin C in that is going to aid the absorption. So always trying to pair your plant-based sources of iron with some vitamin C will help to enrich that. So yeah, I'll just quickly whiz through this slide, which is the blood sugar balancing. But as I was saying before, we want to be aiming for nutrients that are, foods that are high in nutrients like proteins, carbs, but the complex carbs. And we want to also have healthy fats as well, and plenty of fiber. And this is going to keep us on this blue line here so that we're not having peaks and troughs in our energy level. And that is an example of blood sugar balancing, which is very, very important when it comes to our adrenal health and our stress hormones. Because especially if we have low blood sugar, you know, if we're eating a lot of refined carbs, like on this red line, and we go all the way up here, our energy level might be high initially, and then we can go really low. And as a result of that, that's when cortisol gets secreted to kind of shuttle the blood sugar up a little bit.
So yeah, I can see why it's so important, if you do suffer from ME/CFS, that you actually really are careful that you don't have these huge rushes, because then you just have the huge crash.
Yeah, no, it is really important, like I said, and it impacts our stress hormones, and it adds another stress to the system. So yeah, for sure, having balanced meals as much as possible, and just ensuring that you eat regularly as well. You don't go long periods of time without eating, because it's not just about what you eat, but it's also about how often you eat too when it comes to balancing your blood sugar, especially if you're somebody that's quite prone to peaks and troughs. It is really important to address.
I suppose, I mean, there's so much about restrictive eating at the moment, you know, eating within a certain period of time. I think you also have to be aware of how your own body works, and for some people it just may not be suitable. However much they want to do restrictive eating, it just doesn't work for their own metabolism, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's where personalization is so key, because I think with nutrition, it is such a minefield. I mean, you'll have various studies, you know, saying about one modality and then versus another, and everything tends to contradict. But I think we need to always just take a step back and think, actually, the person, you know, that you're dealing with, or the person that you are when you're considering something, is how is my body going to deal with that? Because we can get so caught up in trends and, you know, what everybody else is doing. But again, you know, if you're somebody that, you know, we talk about fasting and things like that, but actually if you're somebody that suffers with poor blood sugar control, then actually eating is going to be the best thing for you. Because, you know, you need to make sure that you're breaking that fast and actually stabilizing that blood sugar. But it's, you know, it's about experimenting and finding what works for you.
And it's also about listening to your body. I mean, I'm a great one for saying it's about trying to listen to your body, because your body will tell you what it wants if you try to become in tune with it. I remember when I had my first child, I just suddenly felt I needed to have iron. Never had iron in my life. What on earth would I know what I needed iron? But I just had it in my head. And as soon as I had some iron pills, I was kind of fine again. But it is so strange, having never thought about it, and suddenly thinking, gosh, I need to have this. God knows where it came from.
Yeah.
And that's it. If you try to listen to your body, rather put down everything that you're reading off the internet or whatever, and just think, what do I need?
Yeah. I think that's really good advice.
As long as you're in tune enough, and that you haven't got your sugars out of control, where your body's just saying sugar, sugar, sugar.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Getting yourself off that roller coaster. But yeah, I think that's really good advice, because I think you have to try and adopt an intuitive approach to dealing with this illness, because as we said before, you know, there's no one size fits all, and you've got to really tune in, because you know, that symptom of post-exertional malaise as well, that's a really key indicator that your body is communicating with you. It's telling you, no more, you're pushing me too far, please don't do that, because now I'm going to show you that I can't handle it. So that's ultimately what pacing is all about, which, I mean, we've got some slides on that in a little bit. But yeah, it definitely is about learning to understand how the body is communicating with you and listening to that and not negating it. Because I think often what we do is we push past, and we always want to kind of do more, and we live in this achieve society, especially when you've had an infection. You think, oh, I want to get back to normal, and when that's not happening, we try to push ourselves out of it, and actually sometimes that can be much more damaging for those symptoms. There's a lot of controversy around graded exercise therapy, which is one of the NHS modalities for ME/CFS, and how exercising your way out of the illness can actually make you, or they think that you can exercise your way out of the illness, but actually it makes a lot of sufferers a lot worse. So we can't force our way through. We can only take a step back and really listen and pace ourselves through it. But anyway, I digress.
So we just very quickly, we've got probably 10
I'm just
minutes.
mindful of time.
And I should keep my mouth shut most of the time because I whisker on. Sorry.
No, don't worry at all. I'll quickly whiz through, but this was just a note on fibre. It's really important to get fibre in the diet. It's the roughage that we get in all plant-based foods. That includes nuts and seeds, includes whole grains, legumes, obviously fruits and vegetables, and it feeds those gut bacteria, and it's known for various different health outcomes in terms of benefiting our health, but really our body doesn't digest it. It's for the gut bacteria, and can impact things like heart health, our gut function, our immune function, and providing anti-inflammatory effects. So we just need to make sure diversity as well. So the more variety we eat in the diet, the better, because that's going to be where we're getting different fibrous compounds, because there are over 100 different types of fiber that have been identified. So the more different types of foods we eat, the more different types of fibers we get, the more benefits we get for our body. Quick note on caffeine. So caffeine also is very important when it comes to blood sugar control, because if we drink caffeine, it actually causes swings in our blood sugar. There are different types of sensitivity to caffeine. So you've got normal sensitivity, which generally tends to be the most of the population, where they can handle roughly 4 cups of coffee a day without any adverse side effects. Hyposensitivity is roughly about 10% of people who have a genetic ability to metabolize caffeine particularly well, where they can drink quite high amounts of caffeine without any adverse side effects, which, I mean, lucky for them. I'm hypersensitivity, which is the last one, which is where I'm very sensitive to caffeine, and I can have a very minor amount and I can experience jitteriness, I can experience fatigue, anxiety, and mood swings. So I try to stay away from caffeine where I can, but it's just being aware that there are different ways in which the body metabolizes that, and you've got different sensitivity levels. But when it comes to fatigue, I think it's something that we really want to be mindful of. I mean, there are some studies that suggest coffee and, coffee itself is beneficial for the polyphenols in there and how it can benefit heart health, and it has antioxidants. But when it comes to fatigue, we need to understand that caffeine adds a major stress to our body's adrenal systems. It also can impact sleep. So always try to have it, if you are having it, very much you need to minimize the amount, if you are having a little bit, but try and have it no later than 2 o'clock and only have it when you're relaxed. But yeah, it can as well, because it can lower our baseline level of energy, because when we become caffeine dependent, we think that somehow we're almost on this energy high and we're feeling better than other people who aren't on caffeine. But actually what we've done is, because we're drinking a lot of it, we're impacting our neurotransmitters and we're lowering our baseline level of energy, to which we need to almost top up by drinking caffeine. And we think we're higher than somebody on this energy score, but actually you're probably topping yourself up to the same as somebody that doesn't drink caffeine. But if you're not drinking caffeine, you're not on this huge roller coaster. So yeah, just be mindful of caffeine. And you wanted to just say there are some great non-caffeine swaps. You want to look at herbal teas like rooibos. Chicory coffee is a great substitute, which almost resembles coffee, and it's a prebiotic, so it's great for our gut health. And then you've got dandelion coffee as well. I'm just being mindful of time, so I'm quickly whizzing through. Types of tiredness. This is an interesting one when we're dealing with fatigue, is because there are various different types of tiredness to be aware of. And whilst we have physical tiredness here, and that refers to, you know, that physical energy demand exceeding energy delivery, you're crashed out, your mitochondria need a bit of time to repair and recoup. But also we have other types of tiredness. You've got emotional tiredness, which is when you've maybe potentially had an argument with your partner or a stressful life event, and that's causing cognitive strain. So it helps to understand, you know, these different contexts of which tiredness can arise, because sometimes this gives us a cue as to what to do about it. Tired and wired is almost like a juxtaposing type of feeling. It's where you are almost kind of, you're awake and you're feeling like you're running on adrenaline, but your body is you're so tired, but your mind is very active. It's, you know, this tired or wired feeling, like jittery, but you're just completely exhausted at the same time. And then environmental, so that is where you potentially could be, you know, sat on the sofa all day, you potentially not had any fresh air, you haven't taken any breaks. It might be a cue that you need to kind of just get up, get a bit of fresh air, open the window, get a glass of water. We call this switching in CFS, is like where we're switching up what we're doing, so breaking a little habit. So if you've been doing something for too long without a break, that can be a sign just to do something different, and that can actually shake up the energy and also support that fatigue and actually reduce that. Obviously with physical fatigue, that is sometimes a sign we do need to rest, but when we talk about the other three elements, it's just understanding that actually there are things that we can do about that to manage that, whether it's looking at stress or taking breaks, getting some fresh air, and, you know, just doing something different. A quick one on sleep. Sleep is when our body hits the save button on all of the daily processes. It helps to store everything as memories. The average sleep time in the UK is about 8 hours, but obviously everybody's sleep time will vary in terms of what we need, because we are all so unique. It's a feature of ME/CFS that the circadian rhythm is lost, because often what can happen is people will sleep in the day or undersleep, you know, at certain periods, and the circadian rhythm is disrupted. But when it comes to a good night's sleep, we need to be thinking of quality over quantity. And we want to try and establish, where we can, if the circadian rhythm is lost, as much as possible, establishing a regular sleep and wake time. And I know that might be difficult for a lot of people to adopt, but just trying to set up, maybe if it's just one of those, like establish a regular sleep time, or just establishing a regular waking time. Keeping the bedroom cool, so making sure that we keep the room around about 18 degrees Celsius, because you're much more likely to fall asleep in a cooler room than in a hotter room. And 18 degrees is roughly the temperature we need when we're falling asleep. Avoiding stimulants before bed. I would argue technology is a huge stimulant, so trying to set a curfew on screen time, which actually blocks melatonin synthesis, melatonin being one of our major sleep hormones, which builds up at night and helps us to nod off. If we're exposed to a lot of blue light, then that blocks that melatonin production. And don't be afraid to nap as well. I think in ME/CFS there's a lot of shame around napping, and I think not being afraid to have a nap, because naps have been associated with increased mood and cognition, improved memory and productivity. So if we can have 20 minutes, not to the point where we're sleeping loads, obviously depending on where you're at in your recovery journey, because obviously if you're suffering with quite severe ME/CFS, some people do need to sleep for a little bit longer. But if you're somebody that just needs a little bit of a nap to function optimally, not negating or denying that, I think is really important. So 20 minutes roughly to restore and recharge, not having naps too late in the day to where it can impact your sleep in the evening. But yeah, don't be afraid to have a nap, and reframe it as something that's an investment in your productivity levels and your function, your body's ability to function moving forwards throughout the day. So just a note on pacing: if we can see our energy as a bit of a bank account, try and stay within a 75% envelope. Imagine if you had, say, £10 to spend each day. You don't want to spend 11 because you can't afford to. That's only going to impact in a crash. You don't want to spend £10 because you're not going to have enough to spend the next day. You want to kind of ration your energy, sit within this 75% rule, see it as you're spending £7.50 each day. And as much as that can be difficult, especially when the energy starts to come in again, this is going to help us to avoid this boom and bust cycle where a bit of energy comes in, we exert ourselves, and then we crash again. It's trying to kind of carefully pace ourselves and sit within our limits ultimately, so that energy starts to come back and we build our reserves and we recover and recuperate. So stress and energy pacing, just to note this, I think this is my final slide. Just understand how to pace your activities, understanding that stress and energy go hand in hand. So we talked about the nervous system and that fight or flight response. So trying where we can to find ways to modulate stress and manage stress. Learn to say no, don't take on more than you can chew, and also try and reframe negative thoughts specifically around your illness, because what we think we feel, and we now have a lot of research implicating the mind and body connection. So we have to understand that if we think negative thoughts, that's only going to impact our nervous system health, it's going to impact our physiology and can compound the fatigue and all of the other symptoms we're experiencing. So I think it's really important to understand how psychology and stress management can really come into play with this illness. But finally, we just want to make sure that the body is in a healing state. So whatever we're doing with our diet and lifestyle, we want to always be thinking, am I in a healing state, and can I get into that healing state? So whether it's our stress, whether it's what we're eating, just always kind of reframing, bringing yourself back. And as we were saying before, learning and listening to what the body is telling you, I think is really key when it comes to dealing with this illness. And that's a bit from me.
Well, fabulous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. I'll just go through the questions now. Actually, do you want to turn off your last slide?
Yeah.
Then I'm not sure that people want to necessarily see me bigger, but I'm sure they'd like to see you bigger. So
there we go.
One of the quick
has it stopped sharing? Just checking.
Yeah, that's fine. You're fine. So first question, I have numerous symptoms that you've listed. I'm active and have a good diet and sleep hygiene. I've gone to my GP a couple of times about my constant tiredness, but my blood tests are absolutely fine. What would you suggest are the first steps I should take to get a diagnosis? That's obviously presuming whether this person may have any or something.
Yeah, so I think trying to navigate your GP and having another conversation with your GP about your symptoms, I think definitely being persistent is really important. And just saying to them, I've done a bit of research and I think I've got all the classic symptoms of ME/CFS. If you've had all of your tests ruled out, I'm sure they'll probably be doing ongoing testing to rule every other potential cause out of those symptoms. But I would push on and be persistent with that, because I think it is important to get a final answer, and also obviously to rule out any other potential causes. And if your GP isn't receptive towards that, you're also welcome to another opinion from another professional.
Absolutely. I've been diagnosed. I have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, and much of what you've said so far resonates fully with me and my symptoms, which will very much mirror those described for ME/CFS. I often feel they're linked. Do you have any thoughts on this? So that's fibromyalgia linked with ME/CFS.
Yeah, there are some links with the ME/CFS and fibromyalgia. I wouldn't be able to tell you the specific science of how they're linked, but just from what I have read in terms of fibromyalgia, it's more that it's kind of similar in terms of how it can set itself up. I think more people with fibromyalgia, it can be sometimes that there's a trauma. People, for instance, have had like a car accident, and then as a result of that, they can end up with fibromyalgia symptoms. But it's almost like the body has gone into this state of hypersensitivity, and its pain signals have dysregulated, and it's almost kind of putting the pain on this loud alert. So you're feeling that, but you're feeling that widespread. But yeah, I'm sorry I can't tell you too much more in terms of the fibromyalgia link with ME, but there is a lot of links with it from what I've read, but I just can't tell you the exact links.
There's lots of symptoms, definitely, for sure.
The symptoms 100% do correlate, yeah.
Will your GP do some of the tests on saliva and stools, or is this best something you need to arrange privately? If so, what's the best way to go locally for your tests and advice?
So with standard testing, I mean, GPs would particularly look at things like your blood work. They'll examine iron, they'll look at thyroid. They might do an ECG to kind of look at your heart. With the testing I run in my clinic, these can be done privately. A lot of the tests at home, some of them they need a phlebotomist. You need a phlebotomist for them. Things like the thyroid, you can do that one. I think that is a phlebotomy one. And the adrenal ones, they can be done at home. So saliva samples, stool tests can be done at home. In terms of kind of steps with that, I suppose it would be finding a practitioner. So whether it's a nutritional therapist or somebody that works within functional medicine, who can run testing, because as I said, there are some tests that aren't offered with the GP, and you might need to seek, specialist support with that from a functional medicine practitioner, naturopath, or nutritional therapist. I hope I've answered that correctly, but yeah, as I said, it'll be the stool testing that looks at kind of the dysbiosis within the gut, any kind of infections there. Adrenal testing to look at the health of your adrenal glands, which is a saliva sample. Thyroid testing. They do run thyroid testing on the NHS, but there are more comprehensive ones out there that can look at whether there are any autoimmune antibodies to the thyroid hormones. And then you can also measure for co-infections as well, which is a blood test. And some of those are run privately, but yeah, I'd say contact a practitioner on that one.
Right. Okay, we have got lots more questions, and I'm afraid not going to get through them, but if I put two together, so how long did it take for you to start, how long does it take, I suppose, to start seeing increases in energy, especially because the person says they're stuck? And the other thing, same question, is how do you know when it's the right time to expand your physical activity?
Yeah, so the first one, I mean, it's hard for me to say, because I think with energy, it's a spectrum, isn't it? And I don't know who's asking that question as an individual. So it would be a lie for me to say, oh, you're going to feel better in 6 months, your energy is going to come back in this much time. But ultimately, it's about, I suppose, in answer to that second question, it kind of links. It's about listening to your body and trying to kind of facilitate all of the things within your diet and lifestyle to actually help get the body into this recovery state where nothing's impeding recovery or any of these functional processes, and working to pace yourself optimally. And what was the second question? It was about how,
when do you know when to start?
Yeah, when will you know? Well, I suppose, yeah, when will you know, say that again. When will you know when to start
expanding?
Expanding. Okay, yeah. So with the expanding, it's trying to kind of understand where you're at. If you're having a crash, giving yourself sensible space to rest and recuperate. And ultimately, your body's only going to communicate with you where you're at and in order to actually sufficiently increase that energy envelope. So I can't tell you, only you're going to be able to actually understand that. And something that is really helpful is completing an activity diary. So try and gauge all the tasks that you're doing each day. Maybe complete a diary of what is energy giving, what is energy taking, and what is energy neutral. So you could be somebody that's watching TV and it's energy building, because maybe you're watching something that's quite fun, and it's context dependent, because you could be watching a horror film and that could be energy draining. And then you could be going for a walk, that could be energy draining, or you could be cooking, that could be energy draining, but you might be meditating and that's energy building. But again, it's independent to you as an individual, because you're going to find certain tasks taxing on your body and other tasks not taxing. So when will you know how to increase is to the point when you get to a stage where your body is feeling quite resilient. You can slightly increase activity and just see how you go. So it's a process of trial and error, really. You've got to listen to your body as it communicates with you, because if you just go a little bit beyond, chances are you're not going to have a big crash. But if you go hugely beyond your capacities, you're going to potentially end up with a bigger crash. So yeah, listen to the body is the best advice, and just try and incrementally increase. And that is what pacing is all about, because I can't tell you how to pace. Only you're going to know how to pace yourself, because you're going to learn through trial and error.
But I'm going to stop it there, end it there, because I know we've got other questions on brain. We might have to ask you to come back to do something especially on brain fog and how to increase activities, because that was just so interesting. Thank you so much, and I hope that everybody else really benefits from it. And I always say it's really interesting, we always end up talking about the gut health. Gut health is so important for everything that our underlying health, isn't it?
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot of research going into the gut and ME/CFS, so that is really fascinating to know. I think it's just, as we're learning more, the research is coming out. But I wish we knew all this stuff back when I was ill, because I mean, God, it's been a minefield. It still is a minefield for people. So I mean, luckily we have these webinars and a community to be able to talk about these things. But yeah, it's a shame that it's taken so long to kind of get to this stage. I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, we've got it recorded now, so I know that lots of people will look back and take on board some of the things that you said, because there was so much information. So it was really great. Thank you so much, Lauren, for your time. It was really fun.
And can I just say one more thing for anyone that's like listening to this that is experiencing ME/CFS? I just want them to know that there is hope and that things do get better. There's no evidence to say you can't get better. So yeah, I suppose just from today's talk, just take hope that things can get better and you can learn so much to equip yourself with just amazing assets for your overall health and abundance, throughout life, because as a preventative measure for other conditions. So I think when you get this illness, sometimes it can feel a lot of doom and gloom, but I want people to think that actually you can learn a lot from getting this illness that can benefit you in the long run. And it does force you to take a step back and actually reassess things, which is a positive in a way.
Definitely. And thank you for ending that on such a positive note.
No, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon. Bye-bye.